thanks for having us. Going to be here to talk about what investors think of your technical architecture. I hope it might not sound like the most interesting topic. I hope it's going to be an interesting discussion and conversation, exploring some of the things that you're very familiar with and probably more familiar than me, with a lot of kind of technical, deeply technical things, and then other things, maybe some of the investor perspective that I have experience with and where I've been working for the last 10 years. Seem like a friendly bunch, so kind of expect and happy to take questions throughout. It's probably more interesting than waiting until the end, but you know, whatever suits you guys, we'll have time, I'm sure. I was just saying to Fran, I've gone a bit mad with AI generated imagery, so that was very humorous to me as I was putting this together. I'm not sure how humorous it will be for you guys, so yeah, let me know what you think of that. Kind of give me some feedback. Is there anything else? Okay, great. No? Okay, so I'll explain why or how we're going to talk about these things in a moment, but I guess just to overview some of the things that hopefully we're going to talk about. So the perspective and priorities of investors who invest in technology and tech-enabled businesses, and that's kind of where I've been working as an advisor to private equity for the last 10 years. I think where that kind of bleeds outside of kind of that world of private equity is around kind of, as technologists, you might be interested in the kind of thinking about the commercial impact of some of the technology decisions and architectures that you put together and you talk to your teams and businesses about. Again, that kind of will touch on some best practice maybe, and that's maybe we can have a conversation about that and share some insights. You know, I think investors, as I think we'll see, there's various risk appetites in investors and different types of investment that they'll make, but kind of they want to minimize that risk, and minimizing risk typically means, you know, looking at good businesses. Good businesses will typically, not always, kind of demonstrate some good practice. So we see that as we advise investors, and just the kind of, we'll touch a little bit upon the kind of the technology due diligence process and how you might buy a business and how you might invest in a business, and again that's kind of where I've been working for the last 10 years, and Fran works with me now. So I guess I've touched on this. So I'm not an investor, unfortunately. My risk appetite is very low. I don't have any money to invest really, so I'm not an investor. Probably like many of you, started my career as an engineer, kind of .NET, Java, .NET kind of path, 20 plus years, a few more than 20 years ago, writing code for a living. The last 10 years now, I worked for a consultancy, Manchester-based consultancy that started a technology due diligence practice about 10 years ago, and we built that practice over those years, and I've kind of spent that time advising investors and the businesses that they invest in as well. And kind of as Fran's alluded to and we mentioned a few times, I manage a team of technical architects who do the same as me. So there's a small group of us that do that. Okay, I guess what's not on there is, you know, I've kind of always been deeply technical. Kind of after my computer science degree, decided to do a master's in advanced computer science. So kind of always enjoyed kind of the nuts and bolts of technology and software engineering. But I think I've always managed to keep a kind of step outside of the technology as well, and kind of always look to step beyond kind of just a narrow focus on technology, kind of been a bit entrepreneurial at times and kept a balanced perspective. So I think that comes in particularly handy when I'm talking to private equity and kind of advising clients, and that's my perspective, which I think might be, you know, not unique but kind of interesting to have a conversation about. Okay, So, what do investors think of your technical architecture? So I guess the start of this presentation and this talk was a bit of a joke in that it might be a very short presentation and they don't really care that much and they don't think that much about your technical architecture and they just want to know how much money they're going to make and I think it's a bit more. There's a bit more to it than that. But that was kind of the genesis for this presentation, that kind of joke, and but I think we're going to move beyond that and kind of explore some of the how they do think about technology. Okay, so I guess the top here is kind of just let's get that out of the way. That the fundamentally these are investors. They are looking to make money. They want a return on their investment. I think we're going to talk about a few different types of investors, and I'll kind of probably very familiar, but maybe don't quite think of it like this, or maybe it's interesting to see it laid out. So it was a bit of a level set. So we're going to talk about, or we have it, seed investors. So seed investors typically kind of invest a small amount of money or a relatively small amount of money in kind of startups, pre-revenue businesses. Their risk appetite is very extreme. They'll look for big rewards in terms of the the return, but also there's big risk there, and there's return profile is in reality 0 to 100x, and there'll be lots of investments that they make that will kind of not make any return at all. And the angel and seed investors, they're typically individuals or past founders who have kind of had a successful exit, and they want to kind of stay involved in businesses hands-on. So I guess as a advisor to private equity, we see some clients in this bucket that want to do kind of very lightweight diligence, but often these guys, the risk appetite is extreme. They don't want to spend a huge amount of money kind of uncovering the risk. They're happy to operate on instinct. They're past founders. Maybe there's a network effect there. They know the businesses that they're investing in. So next up we have kind of venture capital. So I guess the investments become a bit bigger. They're kind of maybe making revenue, these businesses, but they're not yet making a profit. The risk appetite is still high. There's still a lot of risk in these sorts of businesses and these sorts of investments, but the return profile is kind of not as great. So I guess the other bit here to think about is that the people start to change who are doing these investments. So we start to see finance professionals and kind of corporates do this sort of activity and make these sorts of investments. And that with a reduced risk appetite, then we start to see some diligence activity and some risk mitigation as part of the investment process that we'll talk about. And then finally, which is kind of where my day job is really in terms of advising private equity. So these are corporations and institutions investing, millions to billions in profitable, mature businesses. So the risk appetite is very low, and I think that the return that they expect is much lower in consequence of that, and that these are now, we're talking about bankers, financial professionals. I think there's various types of these institutions, but probably your pensions are invested in private equity at some level. So I think that's that kind of where the funding for private equity comes from. One of the avenues for that is your pension. So you'll probably have some of that on your investment portfolio as in your pension. Okay, so any questions on that? Is that clear? Is that kind of aligned with people's kind of understanding of the world and what that might be? Okay. I'm just going to take a drink. So, investing in a business, it's like buying a house. So, I suspect most of you have got some experience of that. So, luckily, there are no chains to collapse. There are maybe a few spanners in the work, but there are estate agents, and there's corporate finance who perform a kind of estate agent role. But the process is very similar. So, you make an offer. You kind of have some initial contractual, kind of lightweight contractual agreement, gain what's called exclusivity, where you kind of, you make your intentions clear, and then you have a period to do some searches, some diligence, essentially, and that's where my company, Crosslake, as a technology due diligence provider, we sit here in the process. So investors will come to us when they've made an offer on a business, maybe sometimes before, when they've made an offer on a business, and they'll ask us to do some diligence. That is very much like a home buyer's survey. So I don't know if I'm sure most of you or some of you will have gone through that process. You get a PDF essentially at the end of it, highlighting the risks in the purchase. So it's very similar what the outcome of what we produce as part of that stage. And investors, they do legal diligence, finance diligence, tax diligence, and they have many advisors that will try and help them uncover the risk in the investment. And they are it's a risk management process. So they're looking to understand what the risks are that might impact their potential future return. And then finally, you complete and get the keys, and that's the kind of final stage, and that's very similar to buying a house. I guess is that clear?
How often? Is it like that house? Very, very few people pull out after doing searches.
Yeah.
How common is it?
So very, very similar. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I think that's I guess Fran will know this. We talk about kind of red flags in our process. We've got like yellow, amber flags and red flags. And I think we have a small number of red flags every year. And even when we have red flags, the investments might still go ahead. So I would say so my company does 1,000 diligences a year. I would say maybe 5 of them probably globally have that sort of number probably 1 or 2 in EMEA, which is our region, which is about 1/3 of the volume. So probably.
What's more likely to happen is they might reduce the offer.
Right.
So to fix this, it will cost X. So therefore.
Okay. And are you, as I'm sorry,
Yeah, it's fine. Let's keep rules.
Do you have any kind of liability?
As in our company.
No, your kind of your advice is that could they kind of come back on you?
Yeah. So it's managed though. That it's not unlimited, but yeah, there is.
You have liability insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there is we do have some skin in the game.
Okay.
Yeah. But there is there's limits to that. It's not.
Yeah.
And our legal team protect us in that. And there's lots. Actually, lots of people have liability there. So the people selling the business have a liability that they've been open and transparent with their advisors and throughout the process. And there's warranties and indemnities that go along. Much like you get that as a house purchase as well. And those come into play as well. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So the customer should be confident that you've done your part of the diligence, and then they can make their decisions. It might be a stone lying somewhere that no one knows about, but
yeah.
it goes, isn't it?
And I think there's a point I make later on that around kind of everyone wants certainty, but they do know that that's not realistic. The time frames involved in here are probably not as long as a house purchase because there's no chains, so it can move quite quickly. And I think there's an understanding that with that kind of you can only do so much diligence, you can only do so much investigation up front, and that's the risk management element of it in terms of the people making the investment, that they have to determine how much stone lifting they want to do. Yeah, exactly that. So for us, the kind of bare minimum would be kind of, we can do this, you know, with a few hours of access with the business. That'll be a workshop, that'll be a phone call, a video call with a business. We'll, if we're down to that sort of access, it's very targeted questions. We can cover quite a lot of ground actually if we're efficient. We've done, do multiple a day kind of thing. So that, the team do three, maybe up to 300 in the year, the EMEA team. So we're pretty good at kind of asking the right questions and know where, well, the next slide will talk to some of the things we were talking about. Kind of every business is kind of unique, but there's lots of common themes that we can go after. Okay, I guess the other point I was going to say, there's also kind of an auction element that can create a bit of pressure around time, which is like a house purchase. So the estate agents, the corporate finance will run an auction process, so that will get lots of interest in the business, and then the people looking to invest in the business are then competitive, and that the people selling the business want confident that they've got a good buyer, they've got somewhat a reliable buyer who can get the deal done. I think when there were tax changes last year maybe, and there was it wasn't inheritance tax, maybe it was inheritance tax, the capital gains tax was changing, and there was a kind of clamour from maybe some smaller businesses, kind of small founder-led businesses. They wanted to sell the business quite quickly, and that created a bit of pressure to they were looking for people to who could be reliable to buy the business. So that again, it makes puts a pressure on how much diligence you can do in the middle. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly that. So that's a maturing kind of it's a mature service for us, but it's mature. The industry and the sector is maturing, and that's becoming more and more popular for people to do that. So yeah, I think we do that. I think maybe about half of the work we do is for we call it sell side or vendor DD. So we will then, whereas in diligence our client is the private equity business investing in the business. When it's sell side, our client is the business that is kind of on the market, and so we work for them. And so I guess that does raise some interesting challenges. We don't want to. It would be maybe easy, you might think, for us to produce brochureware and kind of gloss over some of the facts and the nastiness in the business. The problem with that, of course, is that when a buyer comes along and reads our document, it's not credible, and that kind of creates a load of headache for lots of different people. So we have to balance that kind of, we want our client, do the best for our client, place our client, our house, in the best light as possible, but it's got to be a credible document that kind of stands up to scrutiny and informs the buyers, because otherwise it's kind of not worth the paper it's written on. So yeah, that is something that they'll do. There's always been kind of brochures about businesses, like, you might imagine a house has online a brochure for a house. There's brochures for businesses. There's then the next level of that is where they will do a deeper dive into technology or finance or commercial aspects of the business, and that allows the seller to kind of control the messaging in some areas. So if there is some nastiness, at least they can present it in the best light rather than kind of the worst. Again, there's a point later, the worst thing that can happen is there's a big surprise halfway through the process, because that's going to annoy a lot of people and waste money, so much like with a house purchase, really. If you find that the electrics are dodgy halfway through it, or the roof's dodgy, it's much better if you go with that, empowered with that kind of up front. You can make an appropriate offer and kind of everyone's happy, we're all on the same page. Whereas if we discover that right before we're about to complete, then that's going to be a headache for a lot of people. Okay, so the next bit is to talk about some of the principles that we use kind of going through this process. So avoid the ivory tower. So I think we were talking about this a little bit when I arrived, around kind of the flexibility that you need. So I guess first of all, I imagine most people are familiar with the concept of an ivory tower. I think it came from like academia and kind of people kind of, well, on paper that's great, but like in reality, in real world, in industry, that doesn't really apply. So I think the ivory towers can be useful. Those standards can be useful in terms of having a benchmark and an expectation. But the reality is every business has been on a journey. These businesses, if you think about the types of businesses that these are, that certainly that private equity are investing in, they're mature businesses. When I say mature, they could be 20 plus years of trading. The technology in that business could be 20 years old. There might have been multiple evolutions of the technology in that time. So it's not like we're looking at born in the cloud greenfield technologies here. We're looking at businesses that have got 20 years of, trying to avoid the word, but technical debt and baggage that has built up. So the ivory tower you can't really apply the ivory tower. And in fact, the compromises that businesses make and the kind of the shortcuts they make, the technical debt maybe, is kind of gives them leverage and gives you leverage kind of. So, and that's where the kind of magic is sometimes, a lot of the time. So actually, kind of you really need to understand, like, well, I understand that you've not done Scrum, you've not followed Scrum because of your particular team's or structure, or kind of what you're trying to deliver, and maybe you're doing waterfall or something in between, and trying to understand that. And I think that the challenge we have actually sometimes is that probably much like many people in this room, kind of their instinct tells them something and they operate on instinct, and sometimes if you've been doing it for 20 years you can't necessarily communicate why that works or why you've made that decision. So we have to try and kind of uncover that and understand that. Okay, and I'm not sure this next analogy worked perfectly, but I'll try it and you can kind of give me some feedback. So I suspect most people are familiar with the Goldilocks zone. It's kind of an area of space where if a planet exists, it can like support water and therefore life, and there's like this perfect, it's quite a narrow kind of area of space. And I guess I was looking at this, and this is what came to mind when kind of on one side we have technologists and technology teams who understand the technology kind of and the nuance of their technology decisions, and kind of have an instinct around technology, but are kind of maybe less able to communicate or think commercially. And then on the other side, we've got the kind of investors or commercial leaders of an organisation that kind of maybe are super focused on the spreadsheet, but not necessarily understand or as instinctively understand the technology implications or the implications of technology decisions. So I'm kind of imagining this Goldilocks zone as somewhere where we consider technology and commercial elements of a business, and get to the right decisions, and I think or the right conclusions, and make the right decisions. And I think that's being mindful of that kind of when you're thinking about technology decisions and the impact of technology decisions on your business. I think making sure you're in that Goldilocks zone of, you know, I'm not over-indexing on technology or commercial for you know, like the non-technical people in the room, if there are any. So yeah, so being in the, find the Goldilocks zone. That's what we try to do when we do diligence, I think. Okay, so I'm going to try and get us all to put our investors hat on and try and think some things from the investors' perspective. So these are questions. I think what's coming up is a kind of bit of a role play. So the questions that investors might ask or have asked, and you know, some of them may be a bit humorous, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think it's important for us all to understand their intentions. You know, I think these investors kind of they want to be successful. They want successful businesses. That's kind of how they're going to be successful. Is how everyone's going to be successful. So I think understanding their intention and their thinking behind their questions might help us all to kind of make better technology decisions and better businesses. So some things about our investor. So I think we covered most of this. So they're a finance professional. So that's their background. They might be a board member of multiple businesses, and the reason why I think this is relevant is because they've probably had experience of technical issues impacting those businesses. So some of their questions will come from previous investments and previous challenges at businesses. So they'll kind of, maybe not necessarily buzzword, but they will have heard their businesses talk about technology challenges or solutions to those technology challenges and want to know if they apply to their new investment. And the point at the bottom, they use advisors like ourselves. So I guess we're maybe going to put ourselves in with investor hats on and advisor hats on. Okay, so the first question they might ask is it on AWS? Or is it on the cloud, or you know, any variation on that theme? So I think there's a few things that they're thinking about when they ask this question. So they're one thing that they're thinking about is kind of maybe how potential customers will think about the business and how that plays out for the growth of that business. So if they're in a sector or the business operates in the sector where customers are starting to demand kind of public cloud potentially, that you know, I think we've seen that. We've also seen the inverse now, definitely in different regions, kind of avoiding the cloud providers. But they might be thinking about how their customers might perceive the solution and the technology in the business. I think they're probably quite straightforwardly looking for liabilities around physical infrastructure, so hardware refreshes, security, support, maintenance overheads, like have we got a room full of disk drives somewhere that we've got to maintain. And I think they're also, as I think I've alluded to, that they've kind of got an eye on, even when they're investing, and probably like yourselves, if you're buying a house, like you might be thinking about, am I going to be able to resell this house? Like, what's the kind of the opportunity when I resell this house? And maybe there's a view that's going to be harder if it's not using public cloud or not on public cloud technology. Okay, so I think if you're operating in a business, kind of what should you be thinking about, and kind of how might you tackle kind of dealing with this question? So I think, you know, we all should be thinking about kind of are the customers going to change their requirements? I think if we've got physical infrastructure, there's, as I said about the kind of, you know, there's plenty of use cases where not being on public cloud makes a lot of sense. But if you are in that space, are you proactively managing the physical infrastructure? As much as people, I think, will say, though, yeah, it's fine, we refresh this, we do that, we've got cycles for this. The reality is, in the business, there's a a relatively decent chance that like we're sweating some of that physical infrastructure, the assets there, and that's why it's so appealing. And kind of being proactive around that and kind of knowing that you're doing that is obviously where I talked about that those kind of the technical debt is where the kind of the secret, the advantage comes from. That leveraging that physical infrastructure does create an advantage, I guess, as long as you're managing the resiliency. You've got kind of business continuity plans. You can do that proactively rather than kind of, oh yeah, that'll be fine, that server. It's never failed us yet, and it's like everything's on that. And I don't know if Fran's had some examples, but we do see like servers in the corner of rooms like that. It's like that's probably multiple year we see where people are doing that. So I think it's still a very big liability. So business cloud migration, some people in here have thought about that. Or shift of kind of inefficient, and so but what maybe what that one you don't need to worry about the server. You heard why are we paying for so we can do that. You're doing that. You need to do that. So and then if you are on cloud, kind of thinking about kind of that. Question: is it microservices? So, obviously, microservices are architecture that is allowed. But I think the zeitgeist is it might be, I suppose, if it is anymore. I think lots of investors have been involved in businesses that have been on a microservices journey from and they will have heard of the challenges and the kind of the what can be achieved if we just get onto if we just migrate our monolith to a microservices architecture. Everything will be great, and we'll save the business if we just get it onto microservices. And I think we probably all know that like kind of it's probably that's not the case. It's not some sort of silver bullet, and there's there's lots of challenges with that transformation, and it might not be the right transformation. So they're going to be thinking about, they're going to have that in the back of their mind when they ask that question. They're also going to be, they're probably, if they're asking that question, they might, with that in mind, they're probably making that as a benchmark for best-in-class software. Now, I know James has worked with us on some kind of cloud-native solutions. There's lots of different now, so I don't think microservices is quite the bar that it used to be in terms of what's possible, and certainly on the cloud. So we sometimes have to kind of, if they're asking us that question, it's like, well, no, they're not on microservices, but actually they should be over here somewhere. Their workload supports this model, this architecture better actually, or maybe they need to stay on maybe a monolithic architecture is better for them. I think the investors are thinking about kind of if the solution is scalable as well. So I think that's kind of, if they're asking us this question, we're answering, no, it's not microservices, but they've got, they can demonstrate scalability in lots of different ways as well. So I guess that kind of, the architecture doesn't matter if you can deliver predictably and safely and reliably. So I think if an investor is asking us this question, I think we're as I said, we're going to be talking to them about no, it doesn't matter because they can achieve predictable delivery. I think, having said that, having a path for modernisation is a good thing. It can show that you have that there's that there's a way forward for business to modernise, maybe leverage some of those more modern technologies, cloud technologies, and having a path for that modernisation decreases the uncertainty around what that might to an investor, or you say, look, we're going to stay where we are for that, and skeleton for future modernisation that we need to go down, and then finally the scalability. If the investor is concerned about scalability because they're in a sector that all businesses want to grow, and all investors want their businesses to grow, so there's the kind of this. Yeah, of course we're going to grow. Of course we're going to need to scale. I think being able to answer a few more kind of non-functional requirements. I guess I'm thinking, James, about the project that you worked on and some of the lofty scalability requirements that they came up with. Like, we're going to be this huge business, and the reality is they kind of in some ways over-index that. So there's lots of different ways you can demonstrate scalability, and we can uncover scale, and we can get comfortable with the scalability of a business without necessarily having a microservices architecture or using kind of Lambda. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, we've got a fun one next. Is there any technical debt? So, this is a fun one. So, of course, there's technical debt.
Do you think people mix up technical rods?
Yes. Sorry, go on.
Technical rods and technical debt are two very different things. Technical debt's, well, the way I see it, it's a decision you've taken to take a shortcut now and pay it back later.
Yeah.
Whereas the system will naturally rot, but people will call that technical debt.
Yeah. So I think there's a pretty compelling case for never using the word technical debt ever, even though I've used it multiple times, and we use it in our kind of business regularly, because I'm not quite sure what it means, and I'm not quite sure what investors think when they is it out of support technology? Is it poor code quality? Is it
Does it matter? It's debt because something needs to be repaid. So from their point of view, it's a cost to be had at some point in the future. So they almost shouldn't care why they have to pay it. So it's money they will have to spend as a future more.
Yeah, I think. I think the challenge would be like, do they have to repay it? So, I think technology teams often have kind of strong opinions, or some people have strong opinions that like, oh, we need to rewrite our e-commerce platform because it's in, I don't know. Yeah, out of support.net. So I don't know, a legacy.net version, a legacy PHP version, a legacy, any language version, or framework, and we need to rewrite it because it's in this legacy version. And if we just rewrite it, it's going to solve all our problems. And I think for some technologists, I think this is the kind of that Goldilocks zone. I think it's very easy for us or technologists to be dogmatic about that and kind of, we've got to do that. But I think the commercial case for that kind of, and the business case for that rewrite might not be as clear as you think. What's the business gaining from that? What's that going to unlock for the business? Is that going to accelerate revenue? Is it going to increase customer satisfaction? So those are the things that are going to matter.
Ephemeral nature software, you sell maintenance on a road because there's potholes,
to make it visible. Cover that, but yeah, I guess the point there is like the impacts that it might be having.
Yes,
Yeah, and just to it's on all of them. It's AI's rubbish. I saw today about the clock. So if you ask AI to generate a clock, it's always 10 to 10 because all pictures of clocks on the internet are a 10 to 10 because that's what makes the watch look the best. So if you ask AI to generate, you can't get it. Like generate me a clock at like showing 1:30, it won't do it.
It's also a good cognitive function test for your parents.
This or
no, ask them to draw a clock. Sorry.
Right, okay. And me, maybe. Like, yes, that's a good observation. I'm glad it's taken us, this long to get there. Okay. So I think technology teams kind of over-index on like the technology benefits, and that back to what my Goldilocks zone. So we think, it would be better if we're on .NET 8 or .NET 10 rather than .NET Framework or kind of PHP. I don't know what version are we on 9 now. Go. What 8.4. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it would be better if we're on that than 4.5 or something that people still run. But there's, I guess, they over-index the technical. I guess the other thing they under-index as well, I think, is like the risk involved in that. So there's a huge amount of if you're talking about rewriting a system, there's a huge amount of risk in that. If you've got customers on that, like how are you going to migrate those customers? Are they going to be happy to migrate? Kind of what? We're going to see some churn probably with that, and kind of I'm pretty sure everyone would underestimate how long the writing the code of that would take. So therefore, I think that the business case for that rewrite kind of is on shaky ground, kind of at the start. So I think there's this book, Kill It With Fire, that I've recommended to a few people.
I've recommended it here a few times.
Oh, have you? Oh, perfect. Okay. So this, like the book. There's lots of different things in the book, but there's like a Boy Scout kind of leave it better than you found it kind of approach. I think that's that kind of aligns with the kind of, if you can show a path for modernization, you don't have to do the modernization. If you can show a path for modernization, then that's that can be very compelling. And I think we were talking about show people the value. So kind of do a little bit, show the value of that, show the better user experience, the faster the response times, the advantages of the new technology, and then maybe you'll gain some momentum to rewrite. But the kind of the big bang rewrite of a system, as much as the technology might benefit from it, is the thing to do.
Wrong and what you would want to fix, the value of fixing it, the cost of fixing it. So is that that you have your list, then you can argue which one to do first. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting analogy as well, because if I think back to my house as well, there's like probably lots of jobs that I could do, and there's probably only one or two jobs that like I need to do this year, and like they're kind of I actually need to do, and
and because I know the house and I know kind of I live in the house and I know what's kind of is absolutely necessary, what we're going to benefit from. I guess the point I'm making is kind of technologists probably have that a bit of an instinct there around some of the technology debt and the rot that needs to be done, and communicating that is difficult, really, because I think when it's anything when it's instinctive and you're using your experience, it can be hard to communicate what that is. But kind of stepping back and thinking about the impacts that might be having, like I'm trying to think of that house, like the door that like doesn't open like that, that is that, yeah, it's slowly killing us all. Yeah, that's fine.
Do you think that if it's mostly private equity, their investment cycles are typically 3 or 5 years?
Yeah.
Do you think that affects their other technical debt?
I don't think so. I think of course there's technical debt, just back to this point. So I don't think there's ever an expectation that there's no technical debt. So I think that kind of, and I don't think an investor is ever thinking they want to solve all the problems in 3 to 5 years.
Well, I was thinking more of the fact that the other way, a little bit cynical, would be, well, why would I make that? If I'm not going to get the benefit of it, why not just kind of write it out, sweat the asset, flog it at the end?
Yeah, and I think this is the Goldilocks zone. I think that's maybe a valid strategy. I think the risk that you're running there, though, is that you won't be able to sell the business because an investor will come along and chip you down on price for that, essentially. So I think that's the sort of conversation I think you need to have in that Goldilocks zone. In that that might be the right decision, it might not be the right decision. There's risk with that. I don't think it's for any one technologist to decide that. It's for the business, right? To come to the where do they want the business to be in 3 to 5 years. And I think being dogmatic about it and kind of binary about it isn't going to get anyone anywhere, I don't think. Okay, I've got probably I don't know how we're doing for time, Fran.
You're okay? You're half an hour left?
There's a few more of these. This one's a fun one as well, though. Maybe some of the later ones aren't as fun, but this one's fun. So I guess back to the conversations that this investor might have been having with businesses that they work with or are invested in, and they might have said lack of unit tests is an element of technical debt. Might be. Kind of what would the impact of that be? What would having the unit tests enable and give you? There obviously is value in unit tests, but whether or not a team, and I'm sure we've all maybe some of us have experience where a team has spent a lot of time writing unit tests and doesn't really, the writing the unit tests is technical debt, because then you've got to maintain them and you're not getting any value from them then until someone switches them off. So unit tests on their own really aren't, I don't think, a kind of a useful measure of anything. It might be a signal, and the investor might be looking for a signal of a high quality team, so they might kind of think that, high quality team, high performing teams, they write unit tests, so they might be looking for that. I don't think that's if that's what they're looking for. I think they're thinking about and play small number of end perhaps usage. I think over the years is very kind of that's that structure. There's kind of a diamond where kind of a volume of data. Definitely seen lots of end-to-end tests, not many unit tests, not many integration tests, and then the on the right-hand side, I think this introduces this kind of static analysis. So that's kind of again this concept. I think that might be relatively newer to people, and this I think people are familiar with the concept of shifting testing left, and so static analysis is analysis of the code itself. So running tools like Veracode maybe, or tabs or spaces, or kind of maybe some of that low level kind of the actual code. They're probably thinking about how reliable the software is. They're probably thinking about how secure the software is, maybe how flexible the software is. They're probably also thinking about if they're acquiring a technical asset that has a long shelf life. So they might be equating code quality to kind of, is this something that we're going to have to rewrite? So that might be kind of behind that question.
Staff cost as well. I did due diligence on an American company, and the code was so bad that I came back saying we can't give that to anybody else, and the one guy currently not working on it. It would be too costly to try to do knowledge transfer on that kind of thing.
So when they look at it, what do you think most investors, do they see the values in the code base or in the teams?
Can we pause that question? Can we hold that? Well, I guess maybe it won't take us that long. So I think this might talk to that. So to how long a competitor, the other thing they might ask is how long would a competitor to take to build this? And I guess maybe the reason why I think about this is because I think the value of a business isn't necessarily always in the code. Okay, so I think they do think about broader than just the code. Does that?
I think the code is just a manifestation that's our value in teams. So I've been involved with the bought companies, bought the code base, and the quality left. It just went downhill because would go on. They were the real.
Yeah. I guess I think that's right. I've got a note here that like they might be looking at for reviews on the quality of the team. So they might be asking how good the code is, but really they're asking is the team any good? Yeah. So I think that is right. That kind of that I don't think a bad team can't produce good code. Okay, so like I don't think so. I think if we're saying that there's good code, we're probably also saying there's a strong team there as well.
Yeah, yes, but I think we'll stay post sale. That's the question.
In our case, the code base is large enough and good enough. We can churn staff quite happily and not lose knowledge. There's a size element, so our staff almost is the least valuable asset. We've been getting rid of it and not losing value. So I guess it depends. But it's driven by the code quality. If the code wasn't good enough to
I was going to say you've probably got some good quality code in there, really. If that's
it's not brilliant. It follows standard. It follows normal pattern. It uses modern languages. You can buy somebody on the market or bring somebody from India, show it at using a modern product.
Yeah, and I think there's we could answer that question. Well, what do you mean by high quality? And I think that would be we could probably debate that for a few hours, probably, what that is as well. So I think the thinking behind that question might be some of the things we've talked about. So yeah, I guess the point that the code quality is a fraction of the overall quality of the business. So I think looking at the code only is kind of quite naive, and some clients do ask us to do that, and we actually very quickly start talking about other things rather than the code quality, because we can quickly move past we can actually determine the code quality quite quickly. We can run a tool against it. We can kind of benchmark it quite quickly, and it's kind of not a very interesting question really. The interesting question is, well, what do you want to do with this business? Will the code support that? Will the team support that? So I think the code quality on its own is kind of just a fraction of the value in the business. I think it's interesting the kind of you talking about your code base. So kind of we all have to make pragmatic choices around code quality. If we did spend all our time thinking about code quality and code quality alone, we'd probably never ship any code. So I think it's kind of I think we have to be comfortable with the compromises in the right places, right? So don't disregard it entirely. Kind of think about what matters: reliability, onboarding. Okay, so we're not gonna use some gnarly hexagonal architecture because we know that the cheap engineers maybe that we're trying to find, the junior engineers that we want to onboard aren't going to understand that, are going to just break it. So we're going to use a simpler architecture maybe that kind of we can onboard people to quicker. We can churn people through a bit quicker. We don't need to govern as tightly maybe. We can govern in a different way rather than looking at a conversation around here as well. Code it's like these non around code are now they're reliable. Looking the LLMs are kind of, okay, how long it takes to build? So, I think we ask this sort of question, looking for, so there might be very truly unique type of software. There might also be a bunch of screens, and that's kind of might be a huge amount of CRUD screens and screens and entry screens. There might be some complex, there might be a bunch of those screens connected to some kind of gnarly integration or partnership, and that might be where the value is, or there might be some unique domain knowledge kind of codified in some of those screens as well. So I think when investors ask this sort of question, they're trying to work out what the kind of the unique differentiating value is in the business. It might impact evaluation. It might impact kind of how they negotiate on the investment. If we say actually this is that it wouldn't take a competitor very long at all. There's not much here. That might be a red flag. Maybe I think that might stop an investment. I think there's an interesting kind of conversation that I've not had for a while actually, but kind of how low code and no code platforms affect this. And kind of can there be an IP in a business that has a low code or built their solution on a low code or no code platform? So that's kind of an extreme example. I've not had that conversation for a while. I don't know if people are more comfortable with that now. I guess some points on the left here. So I think this one probably might be the most straightforward of all the questions they might ask us, because I think there's probably, I can't think of many scenarios, I don't know if anyone else can, where they wouldn't have done a penetration testing, or they wouldn't.
What sort of penetration test? Because we ask for physical penetration test. We make sure they have a certificate that says the physical security of the building, so if they're not in the cloud, we want to see the certificate saying they've got locks, and that shows them every time. What do you care? We care that data you're keeping in there.
Yeah, so I suppose I've not made this point or thought about this, but kind of, the penetration test, there's some variability in what that might mean for people. If it's a very lightweight vulnerability scan, so I think people might be familiar with Cyber Essentials. So I think Cyber Essentials is like a very basic security standard that's sponsored by the government, and that I think that they mandate a really lightweight to kind of, I think you can self attest to be Cyber Essentials, the basic, and that's like a really basic vulnerability scan of external infrastructure, tool based, kind of pretty strict, pretty noddy really, I think, and wouldn't really tell you or give you a huge amount of comfort. Then we have kind of grey box, white box penetration, application penetration testing. So that's kind of essentially a kind of hacker for hire, kind of trying to hack in. You give them some information, give them some credentials to your system, and they look for vulnerabilities in your application. And then up to kind of some of the physical testing and some of the testing you've talked about, your previous employees that they've done in terms of, I always think about them, were they flying a drone around somewhere, dropping USB keys and things like that?
No, that was a real thing. That was some people was flying a drone outside our window.
Oh, that was an actual attack?
That was an actual attack,
Okay.
yeah. Well, we presume it was. But yeah, there was a lot of kind of, no tailgating through doors and all that sort of stuff.
So I do think that is an important security control that businesses should have in place. But I think investors might not understand some of the nuance in terms of the type of testing. They're obviously looking at the security posture of the business, and that's what they care about. I think they want to understand readiness for compliance. Maybe if to achieve some of these ISO, they'll need a penetration testing regime, and kind of general risk awareness in terms of the business. So are they dealing with a business that is kind of oblivious to some of the security practices, which is not unheard of for sure.
We're a large company. It's us. They don't do customer data. They don't mention the DOS protection, financial. So for
Yeah.
They were surprised.
Yeah. There might be a checkboxy element to this, but I think there is
The intention from an you as a small business, the size where you can on of compliance money. So ideally, you've done this already.
So I think there's a point here as well that I think you're alluding to, like businesses posh as they grow. So kind of a small business that's not making anything, kind of they can probably be pretty gung-ho in how they approach things. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but there's probably a reasonable posture to kind of get started. As I suppose maybe there's more revenue attached. So the obvious, like the basic, the simple scenario would be like an e-commerce site. It's not taking any orders. Doesn't matter if that e-commerce site goes down for half an hour because it's not taking any orders anyway. But kind of as soon as it starts to take some orders and there's revenue and it's kind of contributing to the business, kind of the impact of an outage kind of raises and the risk posture has to change. So it's natural for risk postures to change, people accept that, I think, and understand that. I think managing that curve, so kind of making sure they're on the right part on that curve, and these investments are actually inflection points for like now. Actually, we do need to. We're at a different. We're in a different ball game now. With the risk is bigger. It's not. I mean, Steve might be the CEO. It's not Steve's money anymore. It's someone's pension. It's someone else's money now that's at risk. So the risk posture needs to change. Some practical kind of points. I think we always look for defense in depth. So you mentioned DDoS protection or a WAF. We've definitely seen businesses that are riddled with SQL injection issues, and they've got a WAF in place, and like, yeah, we knew about those SQL injections. Maybe we were doing PHP 4 point whatever. We knew about those, so we put a WAF in front of it. And now we're all happy and we're fine and we can sleep at night. And I was like, well, there is literally kind of if it doesn't. Yeah, there's not a great security posture just having that one layer of defense at any point. So having multiple layers of defense is always key. And beyond the penetration testing, so we talked about SaaS, we talked about kind of the dynamic application security testing, so things like, and the name, they're based in Northwich, the pen testing, Burp Suite. Does anyone, the Burp Suite? So there's kind of automated tooling that can run on your application, do some of this kind of fuzzing testing of your application, and then bug bounty programs. I think there's a lot of hype around bug bounty programs that in the businesses that we saw maybe 2 years ago. I think that's not quite. I think I always expected that would become quite a common way of ensuring security. Because I think the thing about penetration test is the business kind of, or the hackers for hire look at your system for a week and then go away. A real hacker doesn't have those time constraints, right? They kind of work at it for as long as they think it's worthwhile. So I think a bug bounty is kind of a good balance there of kind of a way of kind of mitigating that kind of, because a penetration test, reality, it is time bound. They test the obvious things, and that's useful. There's no obvious ways of getting through, and that kind of gives us some reassurance, but it's not going to prevent a determined hacker, right? They're going to spend their time looking. They use AI. Absolutely. So maybe it was taking me a bit. I think there's looking at AI. Probably AI features. That's probably what's at the forefront of their mind. That it is increasing their thinking about how people are using AI as part of the SDLC that we've talked about. I'd be interested to hear what people's thoughts are and experiences. There's kind of very quickly, I think we've gone from are they doing that to like just an expectation that people are doing that, and I think that's probably right, and I think that's the reality actually. I think there's maybe an alarming, not an alarming, but a slightly uneasy, like they're not kind of they've got quite comfortable with that quite quickly, and again they're probably thinking about selling the business in the future, kind of very zeitgeisty, and probably will continue to be. So they're kind of, if they're not using AI now, that might be a value creation opportunity. That might be something that they can look at and will want to pull at that thread. Using AI. I think probably most people are using AI. I don't know if in terms of code. No.
Yes, and then telling people about it is.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. I think probably the most interesting point here around, I think finding those use cases where you can leverage off-the-shelf AI technology, and that I think about customer support kind of chatbots. Like there's off-the-shelf tools there that can be deployed quite quickly. They're pretty effective now, actually. They're quite mature in terms of our Wardley map. I think they're definitely on this commodity side here. So finding those opportunities where you can leverage off-the-shelf technology is, I think, a really great place to start. You know, they're language models. They're great at solving language problems, kind of going outside of that and kind of like they're not predictive models. Kind of they can't predict the future. Well, certainly LLMs can't. But they can kind of language process, document processing. They are pretty good at that, or they are very good at that. So kind of finding use cases where you can leverage that technology, I think, is kind of a great place to start. The innovation and pragmatism, I think. My thinking here was it would be great if we could all go off and develop AI models, bespoke AI models, but the reality is that's kind of that's a kind of bit of a Hail Mary shot in terms of the value that you're going to get from that. You're going to invest a lot of time, certainly, in that, and probably money. So I think balancing that kind of instinctive pragmatism around kind of this is going to get us an ROI quickly and demonstrate some value, and then we can build on that. I think that's kind of where people should be. Okay. I do apologise. I've finished my drink, so that's what you guys have. I think this is probably, you know, we do get asked this question. I think they probably quite obvious what they're thinking. I guess one of the things, maybe less obvious things that they might be thinking about is kind of the liabilities associated with data. So if they do have data, maybe they're capturing lots of data, storing lots of PII. What are the value there? Maybe we can do some analysis, and customers love the fact that we've got this data, but kind of definitely people are aware of the liabilities and the risk associated with that. Kind of, are we using this data appropriately? Have we got permission to use this data in this way? Are we securing it properly? So I think they get excited about data, but they also are kind of very clear about some of the liabilities and the risks associated with data.
You now need to tie data to AI. So not customer data, not customer information. A website with 10 years worth of customers clickstream.
Yeah.
If you fit that into an AI model, you can sell that to an AI company wanting to do analysis. So there's all data that people didn't know what to do with. They just kept it just in case, now as value. So
did I have the kind of this kind of volume doesn't equal value? So I think I think there is definitely those use cases where people have got data that is now valuable, but I also think there's people capturing a lot of data that doesn't have any value. Maybe because they can't legally do anything with that data. Certainly in the UK and in the States, I think that there's a bit more liberal around what they can use that data for. But the kind of volume doesn't always mean there's value in it. It still surprises me how many businesses have hundreds of hard-coded reports in their software, and there's lots of reasons why that creates challenges. But the kind of a good place to start is self-service kind of reporting, and then kind of allow your users and people to explore the data and kind of see if there's value in there, rather than kind of telling them that there's value in there because there might not be, as much as you think there might be, and as much as there might be a lot of data or not very much data. You think it might be a lot of data, but the reality is there's other people with 10 times or 100 times the amount of data that kind of it just isn't very valuable. So self-service reporting is kind of a good place to start, I think. Okay, do they use open source? So I think this is kind of a bit of a pet subject, so Fran will be aware. But typically investors are worried about legal risks here, so that's what they see front and centre. So are there going to be any challenges with legal diligence, or as Chief Receiver we talked about insurance and warranties? Open source is always forms, or often forms part of that. So they're definitely coming from a legal perspective. I think the reality that we see, and you probably see and feel, is that the challenge actually is like a security risk, supply chain risk. So it's a double-edged sword. I think they'll often talk to us about open source from a legal perspective. We'll get comfortable or otherwise with their posture, but we might end up being more worried about these guys have no idea what's in their product and what the kind of the components are in their product. And we've looked at some bits, and there's very clearly vulnerabilities in their dependencies. So the kind of Log4j is the one that kind of always jumps to mind. But there's regularly issues in dependencies. You know, looking at you npm and JavaScript ecosystem, but there's definitely other ecosystems affected. It's some of the licensing element is kind of a hygiene factor. It can be quite easy to have open source, or I think Hub, hasn't it? The advanced. Yeah. So I haven't seen that action. That's the tool kind of don't ignore it, especially if you think that your business might be your business is potentially going to go through an acquisition. It's definitely one of the kind of things that gets it on about and does create in the process.
I think more now. So when we had the a couple of months ago, a lot of things like Mediator have gone from purely open source to now a paid model. And a lot of people just upgrade when they realise that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that it was a corporation, an enterprise that was helping these open source packages go kind of what's the word, commercial. And there's an organisation, and yeah, I have got some presentations on that. I think I was saying about going to the Open UK conference in January and hearing about the forks. People aware of how and the health of forks like Elastic, and I think Elastic has gone forked and then came back. Did it? Or no, it didn't fork.
They tried to put a license,
and then they
AWS jumped and created their own version.
Yeah.
So they reverted.
Yeah.
Was it Redis or both? Maybe I don't know. Anyway, it was too late. They lost a big chunk of people. We can't trust you not to prove that on us again. So. But
okay.
It's still two separate problems. There's the open source as in supply chain.
Yeah.
Really, you need to understand what goes into your software. So you should have really understand where you put everything, build the material, like a full understanding of what the code is, scan what you put in, and then the licensing aspect, which is almost a different team, and it's you're almost a legal team that makes sure every time you update your dependency, somebody check the licensing model hasn't changed.
And the other thing that can happen, we talk about the risk posture change. So the other thing that can happen is you can include a dependency and kind of it's got a limit like 10 to, it's free for teams under less than 10 developers. And then you kind of forget about it, and then you grow, and then like, oh, actually we should have relicensed and up the license, or now that we're going to get bought, or we're going to join a bigger organization, that kind of licensing terms we might need to renegotiate. So there's all sorts of interesting things, but it does stem from both of those situations, from like knowing what's in the product, right?
So what we do, we almost forbid developer to pull random piece of the internet without going through due diligence. So I need a library. I need this library. No, you need a library that does that. Have you considered more than one? Have you considered the licensing, the supportabilities, the project? We do due diligence, and they don't upgrade and unless we know, so we keep track because we open to this kind of liability where somebody is saying, oh, now 50% of your software belongs to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the interesting things I've heard about in kind of the public sector and government who might use open source is, and following their, and the approach they take is like that, using open source, not only do you have to do diligence, but it actually has to go through procurement, much like any commercial license. And I think that the other thing we talked about in that situation is that I can say it's one of the going to use Postgres. If you paid this much money, right? So we're saving, but actually we probably put towards funding the project, right? Otherwise, we've got a dependency on this project in there. So that like a lesson and having value and then somehow I think that will be. I think this trend of like going commercial. I think that will probably continue. And to do with coaching, I think like people using open source as a learning and kind of the hobby of contributing to open source. I think that might change.
There's been too many incidents of people saying, "Oh my God, my software has failed." Like who's supporting this? And they realize that library is one guy.
Yeah.
The Unix kernel
I love
is
that.
supported by one guy.
And that was it the heart? It was Open SSL or one of the SSL libraries, and it was I think I remember reading that one so there literally was one person who could solve this problem, and he didn't have health insurance. He didn't he was kind of, there was no security for that guy who was literally like the comic book is funny because it's true, right? It's
I think it's Unix kernel. I think there's an element of Unix kernel that maintained by one guy somewhere in the world. That's all he does. That's all he cares. He talks to nobody. One day we pass away. But there are people pushing back as well because they get contacted by a company like yours and say like, oh, what's your licensing model? Show me your InfoSec certificate. And guys, I'm a guy in my garage. I don't care what you do. I use my software for.
And the unintended or the emerging consequences. Like the guy in his garage, hobby, having some fun. Might find himself in the situation where he's some corporation has included his and his code base, and they've kind of gone along in parallel, oblivious to each other, and then suddenly, maybe the guy gets hit by a bus, heaven forbid, or wins the lottery. Let's do that one. Stops maintaining it, and then we've got a problem. Okay, so the final question that we do get asked is would you invest? So, again, we've got the Excel on the back of the... I think I did use Excel in the prompt, and he kind of just put it on I can't remember. So we get asked this question. I guess, probably much like this, at the end of maybe a feedback session, it's we've gone through the issues with the business, would you invest? And I think they're kind of, they're looking for us at this point to kind of, forget all the detail, kind of, what's your high level instinctive kind of, what's your gut feel. And I think I was reflecting on this, and I think most times they're looking at strong businesses, or that they're compelling businesses, and there might be technical debt, it might be built on PHP 4.5 kind of no framework, kind of gnarly inline PHP, kind of that. I think we probably all picture what that might look like. Probably would still invest some of my, small investment portfolio. Very rare we'd say no to that question. Get very got to this bad, and it's. I think this and again, back to this Goldilocks zone of like, but does it really matter? Like, kind of, and why does it matter? And you know, the technology in a lot of ways just serves the business and supports the business, and kind of they've got to coincide and not one lead the other. And I guess Fran kind of prompted me to, like talking to Fran, kind of questions they don't ask. And I think we could probably spend hours talking about these. About the business outcome, talk about the impact of some of the capital spaces. Does it matter? Well, yes, because I can't possibly imagine a scenario where that does kind of impact an investor's decision. But maybe that's a fun thought experiment to think about what that would be, and if there is one. But you know, the unit test framework, you know, it's absolutely more important that they've got a holistic approach to testing rather than the particular framework that they're using, even though it's fun to kind of argue that one's better than the other.
It's not an ad-like. If it's one or the other, that's fine. It's when you've got 6 of them.
yeah, that's a good. Yeah, absolutely. Curly braces definitely go on a new line. Yeah, that's particularly funny for just that tabs and spaces. Okay, thanks for listening to that.
Any questions? That's quite interactive.
You touched on at the very end there about the question, do they use open source? Surely it's impossible for any business now to operate closed source. And I know a few companies that claim to not use open source, and both companies that I know of all use .NET, which is open source.
Yeah.
And if they are not using open source, surely that's a massive red flag, because they're wasting time rewriting stuff that already exists that they could just leverage. And if they're using a third party, they're probably using open source. Is it even a question?
No, I think you're making a very valid point. But yeah, and I think we've heard that as well. There's various like. I think I've seen a few businesses answer that question. No, we don't use open source. And then there's kind of maybe the scenario where they're using .NET, but they actually are limiting any third-party dependencies, and they do try and kind of have a standalone package and kind of a solution. But the kind of some of the language technology is clearly open source, and that's kind of maybe they can get away with saying that they don't use open source in that. Maybe they could argue comfortably. There's definitely the other type of business that say no, we don't use open source, but then we see like React or like kind of Angular or one of the many open source technologies that would be there. I think the first type of business is very hard to imagine a business that doesn't use some open source, and then maybe worth discussing the merits of that. I think about businesses that do need to control the business that has like no awareness. That's kind of the kind of idle RM kind of team as well. That's an interesting team. Kind of we didn't want to use entity framework, or I don't know what that. I keep using PHP or nhibernate for the Java devs. And we rolled our own. I guess that's kind of a. Why did you roll your own? Just because. Kind of not like this supply chain reason, just because they fancied it, or we didn't like Dapper or whatever the reason might be.
What you don't know is James did actually write his own number.
I'll carry that. It started out as a wrapper to stop bad developers using it to do with their own.
That's got awkward, hasn't it? Yeah, sorry.
I think that's my
Yeah, that's
Is it? Yeah.
I'm just interested, sort of thinking back to your last year's worth of, I guess, profile, company profiles that you've done. Sort of the standout, the ones that you would invest in. Were you attracted to the business idea or the software or the processes inside the company? Are there any sort of standouts?
That's a good question. I'm trying not to answer really boringly. And I'm trying to think of like concrete examples, but I'm sorry, my brain's not quite getting there. I think the boring answer is the combination of everything. It's not one thing. It's businesses that are using technology to serve a need, and there's opportunity for growth. And there's a timing element to that in terms of this is there's huge maybe there's a convergence of they're using AI, so that's going to attract lots of users and investors, and the technology is reliable and robust, and there's a good team that kind of have got good vision and got good principles, and I can see that being the chances of their success are enhanced by the team that's in place. So I think it's very rarely, I think when it's just technology, like we've seen some really interesting technology and really interesting technology, gnarly technology, but kind of there's no demand for that technology. Maybe that's where that's on the edge of we invest, but this isn't gonna, this might trickle along. It's not kind of gonna go on a great curve. So I think, the boring answer to that is probably it's got to be a combination of everything. I think it's not one thing.
Do you ever have the situation where you go in and you look at a company and the idea of the company is great, their proposition is great, it's just badly executed, and the team that created it are inadequate? So you would go in and go, basically, this could be like the gold mine, whatever. But you need to get rid of the product, you need to get rid of the team and rebuild it from scratch. Is that ever something that gets suggested, or is it always a case of this could be better, and you sort of piecemeal and change it out?
I don't think so, but I think that is maybe a bit of a bias in terms of the types of businesses that we see. So we see mature, stable businesses.
Right.
So I can't imagine, that we see those kind of maybe that would ever be that situation would ever arise where you would want to kind of throw out a team or a product. These are mature businesses very often, or almost entirely. Did you have a thought there, Fran?
Was there only the odd occasion you see a single developer supporting the entire thing? You wouldn't throw them out. Quite the opposite. But you want to work quickly, especially as if you're being bought out, and maybe you won't be particularly happy. So you want to highlight that. Keep this guy happy. You need him.
I think we.
Project time, and one guy that's holding everything.
Yeah.
So about the boring answer, but really, the best solution isn't always the best solution. So rather than going for the best technology or the most diligent, it's that keeping something, using technologies that are good enough and keeping them simple enough.
Yeah.
It's probably the best way to go, because then you can onboard people easily, you can react better. You won't get called out by something that doesn't go anywhere, etc.
Yeah.
But then keep hedging forwards. But that's the utopia we all work
Yeah.
towards, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that we definitely just thinking about kind of big bang rewrites. So when people start talking about that sort of situation, that's when we get worried. In terms of, it's going to cost a lot of money to do that. It's going to be a long time before you see the value of that, and so therefore there's a lot of risk. I think we were talking about agile. The rewrite situation is, I'm sure many people have done many presentations. Like the rewrite conversation is interesting because people will talk now about kind of, can we use AI? We'll just use AI to rewrite that. We'll just get AI and we can translate, we can modernize that .NET application using AI, can't we? And I think if you were in that situation, would you ever want the exact same solution? The exact same, would you rebuild it line for line? Kind of, I don't think you'd. I think that would probably be alarming if someone was going to suggest that to us. So I think that then you kind of think about, well, what are you going to rebuild? How are you going to rebuild it?
Because the product owners, the customers, and the developers all have little things that they've always wanted to change. It's like, well, we're going to create a new one, but rather than the big bang, if you're trying to resell the company, it's going to take 10 years to completely replace something. It could be the next 2 years we'll retrain or restructure the teams so they have a vertical slice. There we go, we've got something working now, we can expand on that and gradually destroy the old product. We can sell that as a solution to the next buyer.
And I think the interesting thing that happens along that journey is that at some point you say, well, okay, we've proven that we can modernize it. We've proven that we've got a path to modernization. Okay, now we can maybe accelerate kind of the migration, the tail of the migration. And then there's like a tail of the functionality maybe that one customer uses, and is there any business case for modernizing that?
First thing, we put logging on the application, go, nothing really is touched.
Yeah. Just see who shouts and when they shout. Yeah, definitely.
Do you mostly deal with British private equity? Do you ever deal with American or European?
Yeah, so it's a global company. We are the EMEA team. About a third to a quarter of the business that that we do as a company is in EMEA. So that's UK and Europe mainly. I'm trying to think like France, Nordics are the big ones. Private equity is largest in the UK in terms of our region. So that's kind of where the majority of our region's work is in the UK. We get put on projects in the States semi-regularly. Australia, you were doing. So sometimes the private equity might be UK-based private equity investing in an Australian business, for example, or it might be an American private equity, or it kind of depends. So we've got, but UK and America are like the kind of most active areas.
And a big difference between the US and the UK around the difference?
We I think we like to think that the EMEA region is more sophisticated in what they demand from us, and the American maybe they're kind of a bit more. Maybe their risk appetite is slightly different actually, so they're not as demanding in terms of the level of certainty. Maybe that's what's going on. I think we think there's we slightly lead in terms of maturity and sophistication of what our clients ask of us, and the private equity market to the States. But I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know if you're thinking of anything else.
I was just curious. I've been in companies that were bought out by one American, one UK.
Yeah, we obviously don't see them operate the business, although that has happened to me and happened to us. So we worked for a UK business, a kind of founder-led business that got acquired by Crosslake. So we've kind of been through that, but that's kind of a sample size of one. So
yeah, my sample size is 3, I think. So it's not massive. I'm just curious.
we see there's different. What we do see is different private equities have different approaches to managing their portfolio. So some are, I guess they have personalities. These businesses, these private equities, so they have approaches. They might have sector specialisms. They might have, size. They might only invest in large businesses, or they might invest in smaller businesses. They might be majority shareholders. They might be minority shareholders. So and they might be looking for businesses that they can add a lot of value to, not quite distressed businesses, but to businesses that are at a particular, stage on a growth curve. So that might depend on how actively they manage their portfolio. So I guess we see a little bit of that. And others that are hands-off and more hands-off. But we don't see it kind of day to day, really, how they operate.
Do you ever get, I'm just curious about the other way around, do you ever get like investors coming to you saying, look, we want a business that is, it's blockchain with AI, with, because we think these are the things we can sell to the equity market, or even we've seen an opportunity for modernisation in this area, find as a business that we can build up that fulfills that requirement.
Yeah,
Do you
no.
ever see that?
Phil Kirsty to the...
A lot of it will leave, exactly,
No, I think the closest we get, so the estate agents, corporate finance, will prepare businesses for the market, and so we might get engaged by corporate finance to have early, kind of chats with those businesses about kind of how, are there any alarm bells, anything obvious that they need to go away and think about before they go to market, how start to think about how they might position in the market. So talk about the AI maybe opportunity. So that's probably the closest we get. Kind of thinking about that. But we
investment teams generally they have researchers.
Yeah, it's called origination. So these private equity firms have origination teams that will find the businesses that align with their profile, and that's kind of a network. There's an auction. There's people that go out hunting for these businesses. There are people that kind of go on the auction sites and kind of see what's publicly available, and then everything in between. So.
I'm reminded of some guys who are like, we want to start a business. They're going back 10 years ago, and they sort of searched like, what's the most popular unfulfilled search on Google or something, and it's something like parrot cages in Arizona. Something like that, and they're like, right, okay, well, we'll just do that, and they made like a shit ton.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. We'll just be the guys that do that, and so it's interesting that you could be right. There's a real appetite for AI, obviously, but this industry is set to, you know what I mean? There's this idea there's a perfect business to build that you could sell. Do you have any sense of?
No, I guess I'm thinking
what that might be.
for asking for a friend. No, I don't think so. I think back.
You're keeping it to yourself.
Yeah, I am actually. Me and Fran have got a thing going.
investment.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
Just playing along.
Yeah.
This is where they just go around asking us to invest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir. We've got a
Right, now, a practical question, if I may.
Okay.
So the whole thing about open source, there's this idea of software bill of materials,
Yeah.
Are there any tools that you can just go, right, point this at let's say it's a NuGet based, like it's a Visual Studio, it's .NET, just give me my software bill of materials. Is there anything you can, what do you use for that?
So we use, as a company, we have a partnership with a tool called Cast. So they we use that for executing open source assessments or audits. It does a good job. There are open source packages, so things like, we mentioned GitHub now does it kind of inbuilt. There's kind of there's OWASP
dependency track.
Yeah.
Open source and free.
Well, you can point it at your solution kind of thing, it'll just give you a
Point it.
SBOM.
Well, because it's free, it's a little bit more complicated. So you have to get an SBOM generator, which I'm putting. There's a little bit of
Yeah.
configuring.
Yeah.
And then there's things like Sneak and Sonotype and
But please use GitHub Advanced Security because we really need some feedback on that.
yeah, please do, yeah. Feed us. And kind of, I think some of the package management have it built in as well, right? So I think I'm not sure if I've done it on NuGet, but if you can kind of like list licenses, and then it'll list there, and that gets you reasonable level of everything that you've included on purpose. There's then some nuance and kind of like things that aren't in the package management manager, kind of what they are, what they might be. And then there's kind of another level about kind of there's a business called Black Duck that specializes in code snippets. So you might take a few lines of code from an open source package and put it in your solution. And there's a business called Black Duck who kind of, that's their specialism, and they can line by line, they look for like groups of like, I don't know, between 5 and 10 lines with reasonable certainty. And so they've got the database of open source software, and so they like snippet detection, it's called. I imagine GitHub will get there eventually with that because they've got everything to do that. I know they do it for, if you use Copilot, they kind of look for, with the suggestions, that you can turn it off. So if it makes recommendations that are obviously, I can't remember what the exact check, but if it makes a recommendation that it's got in its open source dependent in library, then it'll flag that, and you can either get it to flag it for you and refer you to it, or you can just get it to not make those recommendations. So they've got the technology to do it. Actually, I think eventually they'll get there.